Hello, everyone. My name is Silas. Welcome to Brookline Booksmith's author event series and our new event space upstairs here. A few housekeeping notes, please keep your phones on silent. If you haven't picked up a pre-ordered book, you can do so in the back. You can also buy a book. And also, we've got a table with safe passage, swag, literature information. So please visit us there at the end of the event as well. And there will be time for a Q&A, so get those questions ready. We're here tonight for discussion with Jakob Wheeler, author of Angel of the Garbage Dump. Jakob fell in love with Guatemala while studying Spanish in
Quetzaltenango.
There we go. His first book, Between Light and Snow, University of Nebraska Press, 2011, covered Guatemala's child adoption industry. Wheeler lives in Traverse City, Michigan, with his wife Sarah and children Nina and Leo. He publishes the Glen Arbor Sun newspaper and works with student journalists at Northwestern Michigan College. Angel of the Garbage Dump is the story of Maine native Hanley Denning. He saw poverty and desperation in its ugliest form and refused to turn a blind eye. A former track star at Bowdoin College, Denning was struck by what she saw at the Guatemalan city dump. Garbage pickers competing with vultures for the food dumped by trucks, toddlers playing amidst the rats. The experience prompted her to, as Mother Teresa said, find her own Calcutta. Hanley called her family in New England and asked them to sell everything that she owned and wire her the money. Then she launched an educational reinforcement nonprofit called Safe Passage, or Camino Seguro, and helped pull thousands of children out of one of the largest urban landfills in the Americas. Denning was killed in a car accident, unfortunately, outside of the Guatemalan capital in 2011, but Safe Passage continues to change countless lives today, and Jakob Wheeler is here to tell us all about that. So welcome.
Thanks so much, Alice and Alex and the Brookline Booksmith team. I'm really grateful that you're hosting me in this discussion. Alice, am I looking? Is this the live right there?
Yes,
okay, great.
but you can look forward.
Cool.
Or wherever you'd like.
So thanks to those who are watching from the interwebs. Thanks for coming out. Some dear old friends, some high school friends, which is really exciting. And I got a chance to chat with a few of you just a few moments ago. Those who have been to Guatemala recently, who are supporting Safe Passage Camino Seguro, who know Hanley's story, and who's, I think your daughter, a couple of you mentioned, knew Hanley personally. That's great. I mean, I'm going to kind of read a few excerpts here and chat and narrate for about 40 minutes, but I'm most looking forward to the conversation that happens between all of us for 15 minutes or so, after which I'll sign books. But so many of you, a few of you know this story well, and I want to hear your thoughts, your experiences on Guatemala City garbage dumps, or places like it, or your perspective on her or the story. Yeah, I think Silas' intro covered some of the basics. My name's Jakob Wheeler. I live in Traverse City, Michigan, where I grew up. I'm a journalist and writer. I fell in love with Guatemala in my mid-20s, I guess, learning Spanish in Xela. The country called me for its beauty, its languages, its mystique, but also, I think as a first world citizen, as an advocate, as a writer, I felt compelled and wanted to tell stories about Guatemala as well. And so this became my second book about Guatemala, the first 11 years ago about international adoption. I knew Hanley briefly when I spent time in Antigua, Guatemala, for my adoption book. I didn't know her well, and I didn't work for Safe Passage, but I knew of the work that was happening. And I met her a couple times when she came to my community of Michigan on fundraising trips as well. She was killed in 2007 in a car accident, tragic. The idea kind of germinated for many years too, and I was approached by friends who encouraged me to consider writing a book about Hanley. It wasn't until, I don't know, 5-6 years ago, having had conversations with Guatemalan friends and also some of her friends and family, and mostly in Maine, where she's from, that I began to realize that this kind of mystique of Hanley the angel, but albeit almost like a cliched angel who lifted up so many, brought so many out of poverty. It wasn't until I realized that there was a more, like all of us, a more complex person behind her, who was so driven in her work and so tenacious that she could be almost unrealistic in her expectations of people around her. It began to feel for me like a more nuanced person, a more nuanced story, and that's when I decided I wanted to write a book about her. In a way to suggest that, even any of us, imperfect mortals, can also make a conscious decision to, not to ignore poverty and to make a change in the world. We can all do that. Let's read a few excerpts. First, a show of hands. How many have been to the Guatemala City garbage dump or that community? Okay. We're going to go there first. Can you hear me okay, by the way? Yes. All right. These are a few words from the very opening of the book, chapter 1, titled, Staring into the Abyss. Black vultures soar in the sky above the garbage dump. They glide in meandering circles, carried by the updrafts of the wind as it whispers over the hills and volcanoes of this beautiful, rugged, haunting land. The buzzards wait, watching, smelling for opportunity below them, something fresh or something rotting. They follow a pecking order that determines which vultures will eat first: a meat carcass, a bag of rotting fruit, a stack of moldy tortillas. These scavengers are not picky. Far below, a truck arrives, dumping more trash into the teeming filth, its contents spilling into the ravine below. Creatures that look like ants scurry around the vehicle, carrying away their own treasures. Suddenly, the vultures sense opportunity. They turn and dive down, passing over the city cemetery and its tapestry of crosses and ornately decorated mausoleums. Like the trucks, this cemetery also feeds the garbage dump. The deceased whose families don't pay rent for their vaults here sometimes get evicted, their corpses tossed over the cliff and into the landfill that seems to suck everything into its grotesque, hungry maw. Only the vultures glide effortlessly between the filth and the volcanic views above. As the birds sweep down to eat, those ants swarming the yellow garbage truck evolve, suddenly becoming people. A second truck leaves the city streets and enters the basurero, the garbage dump, to drop its payload, and 4 men jump onto its back fender and hold on. Others jockey for position, placing their palms on the sides of the truck as it moves toward the ravine. Then when it stops, they box out their fellow scavengers like bouncers blocking the entrance to a nightclub. The truck's hopper opens, and they climb up onto the trash as it tumbles down. One man grips the rope attached to the hopper, swings back and forth while peering inside to see what treasure the garbage yields today. Each dump truck bears 3 digits written on its side, which broadcasts the zone of the city from which this garbage comes. Could it be whole, uneaten pizzas and discarded electronics from zone 1 where the wealthy live? Or chicken scraps in plastic bags, rotting fruits and vegetables. Even plastic bags and sheet metal command value in these parts of the city. They could be used for shelter or sold in the underground market. These industrious scavengers at work here are the guajeros, the waste pickers of Guatemala City, the forgotten, the damned, the abused, the recycling class of society who make their living on the scraps and refuse of others. They live off the basura, the garbage. They are destitute vagabonds. Some are drug addicts. They are survivors of broken families, of forced migration, of a civil war. The guajeros have worked here for decades. Their community grows whenever the rural coffee crop in the western highlands fails, or the price of corn and beans, Guatemala's staple foods, rises, or in the 1980s, when the army marched into villages and left massacres in its wake, forcing rural Mayan Indians to migrate to the anonymity of the capital city. Nothing is easy in the desperate and violent city, but a strange opportunity always awaits here in the abyss of the garbage dump, even for unskilled migrants. They don baseball caps, hoods and rags to shield themselves from the heat, the smells, the dust, the noxious methane gases that bubble below the surface, even from pecking vultures. The women wear their babies in slings on their backs. or they place the infants carefully in a cardboard box, enclosed to keep out the sun and the greedy birds. As soon as they are old enough to walk, the children are put to work too. Their skinny arms reach into the piles of garbage. The boys use broomsticks to stir the trash, always in search of treasures. Here now, a skinny boy in a soiled orange soccer jersey runs among the vultures, shooing them away with his stick, and throwing an elbow to keep other kids away from his pile of trash. The rumble of the yellow truck grows distant, replaced by the sound of children playing. 3 boys wrestle in the dirt as mangy puppies nip at their ankles. The varones look no older than 4, but the malnutrition that has long plagued the Guatemalan poor mean they could be 8. Raised in the dump, they learn a toughness that makes them act like teenagers. There, a young girl with tiny dark olive eyes and wearing a flowery white dress coated in mud sits on a tire, holding a baby in her lap. She rocks and coos her sibling while the mother works nearby with the other guajeros, picking through a mound of plastic in search of discarded tennis shoes. Espera un rato, the mother tells her daughter. Just wait a moment. The boy in the orange soccer jersey returns bearing gifts. He hands the girl an open yogurt container that has hardly been touched. He pulls a spoon from his pocket. And behold this, a chicken drumstick, still warm. The girl takes the chicken and uses her thin fingers to tear off strips of meat, which she slips into a clear plastic bag that she places in her pocket, a meal for later. She tosses the drumstick bone onto the ground, where it is immediately claimed by a vulture, who spreads its wings and hops 10 yards away before it discards the now worthless bone once again. It comes to rest in the dirt next to a cardboard box. There, what is that sticking out of the box? A child's elongated arm, the hand hanging limp at the wrist. There is no movement. This is the scene that is a Maine native, Bowdoin College alum and BU Wheelock social work degree, Hanley Denning, saw. She had been in Guatemala for a couple of years working for a different NGO and learning Spanish. And her family was encouraging her to come home. You know, her father, Michael Denning in Yarmouth, Maine, an international banker who was well-traveled but couldn't really see any value in his daughter being in a dangerous place like this. She was about to come home to the States and do something else. And then a friend of hers, a nun, Sister Regina Palacios from Texas, knew she was kind of looking for some sort of calling, and she encouraged Hanley to come with her to the Guatemala City garbage dump one day. She saw this scene and called home and said, I can't ignore what I've seen. I can't ignore kids living in this, not going to school, not having a future. And she said to her mom, Marina, and this was end of 1999, sell my computer and my car, wire me the money. And she launched on a shoestring, without really much of a daily, weekly, or monthly plan. She launched Camino Seguro, Safe Passage, recruited some volunteers, Scandinavians, later North Americans from language schools. Later she was able to pay Guatemalans. But her program grew. But there was a problem. One of the first obstacles Hanley faced, in addition to the fact that the local Guatemalan elite, the priest who led her the little rat-filled church where she set up shop, the local school teachers, no one really thought that these kids, these families, the Guajiro community was savable or worth saving, so she didn't have a lot of buy-in initially. But through her own tenacity, she convinced Guatemalans and people from the global north alike that it was worth sending these children to school. But there, at this point, there wasn't really a culture of education among the Guajiro families. If you were a parent, mostly a single mother, looking for food in the garbage dump, looking for metals and plastics and nylons that you can sell in the underground economy, having your teenager or even your 8 or 10-year-old or even your 4-year-old there to help you pick through garbage is helpful. So initially, this offer of an education, it wasn't well received by the Guajeros. They also didn't trust Hanley. There's a history of oppression from North America to Guatemala. And here Hanley is speaking a different language. What I mean by that is the language of education to them. They didn't trust her at first. They thought there was fear that she would steal their children. So I want to read a brief section about that shows how, in part, how Hanley Denning was able to gain the trust of this community in the Guatemala City Garbage Dump. And let me know if I'm going too fast or if I'm inaudible or something. One story above all shows how Hanley gained the trust of the last of the Guajero holdouts, who still worried that she would steal their children. That story would be passed down through the annals of Camino Seguro as a legend, but it was a true story, and Claudio Ramos had a front row seat. One morning, Hanley arrived at La Iglesia, the church that the priest had lent her as a temporary school drop-in center. She arrived at La Iglesia to find that someone had stolen the portón, the metal gate. They had broken into the church and taken the plastic chairs, taken books and school supplies. She was aghast and overcome with anger. But Hanley was also determined. This wasn't right. She would find the thief and compel them to return what they had stolen. "Don't do it," said Claudio Ramos and Maribel Chorotillo. "These are dangerous gang members who could hurt you if you make them feel threatened. It's not worth it." The metal gate, the other supplies could be replaced for a few $100s. And by then, donations were rolling into the project. But to Hanley, that wasn't the point. Someone in Zone 3 couldn't just steal what was meant for the children, the community's own children. She needed to find the thief. With Claudio by her side, Hanley asked the man who ran a small tienda store near the church if he'd seen anything suspicious. "I didn't see who did it, but I can imagine someone in the Colonia Landivar would know," he responded cryptically. Hanley walked straight through the Colonia, down a dark street toward the house suggested by the store owner. Claudio followed close behind, wary of what his boss might encounter. She banged on the door. A man's voice answered through a door grate. His face was cloaked in shadow, only his eyes were visible. His reaction was aggressive. "I don't know anything," the man yelled. "It wasn't me. Go away because I'm in my house." Claudio guessed that he may have been on drugs. "These things that were stolen are for the kids, not for me," Hanley said in a firm voice. "These are for your kids, the children of this colonia." By now a crowd had gathered. Noise and rumors of a fight traveled swiftly in the garbage dump community. What would the man inside the door do? What would Hanley do? Contrary to some versions of this legend, the metal gate wasn't returned. Neither were the plastic chairs or the school supplies. They had to be purchased again. But that didn't matter. Hanley's pursuit of the thief wasn't about the materials. Whether she intended it or not, she had passed an important test. Her show of force convinced the last of the holdouts that her commitment to the people of the garbage dump was genuine. She wasn't going to steal their children. She was going to help them go to school and dream about a better future. The theft of the portón wasn't the only time that someone robbed the church. But the next time it happened, it was the Guajero families themselves who took offense, as Hanley had done. One morning, she and Joanne, her first volunteer from Denmark, arrived at La Iglesia to find the roof panel torn off and tables and chairs strewn about inside. Someone had stolen the hot plate, which Hanley's volunteers used to warm up beans and rice for the children. The pencils, vitamin pills, even the teddy bears were gone too. "Who the hell would steal teddy bears from children?" asked the Danish woman in disbelief. Suddenly they heard Mama Roque shouting angrily outside in the street. A flock of Guajero mothers had gathered in front of the church with brooms and sticks. Some of their children gripped rocks in their hands. They were ready for battle. Mama Roque clenched the collar of a young man who was dressed in rags. He attempted to smile when he saw Hanley, but his eyes were filled with fear. A couple other mothers clutched another young man. "We caught them. They stole from you, from us," yelled Mama Roque. "What should we do with them? Should we burn them or stone them to death? Or should we do both?" The women began to whack the thieves with their brooms as the boys wept. It turned out that, high on drugs, they had broken into the church from above and then fallen asleep on the hot metal roof. One boy still had the hot plate under his arm. Hanley stepped forward and quickly calmed the situation. "There's no reason to lynch anyone here," she said. "If they return what they stole, they can go free." Mama Roque released her grip on the boy in rags. A short time later, the boy returned with a box of supplies he had stolen from the church. Joanne thought that Mama Roque actually looked disappointed. The teddy bears were never returned, but Hanley and the volunteers understood that the families of the garbage dump were starting to care about her project, their project. They were starting to care about their children's education. Jumping around a bit, Hanley's first, well, not her first, but her Guatemalan deputy, Leti Mendez, one of the closest people to Hanley and most affected by Hanley's sudden tragic death. Leti was a great source for me retelling the story. But I'll read a bit about Letty's perspective on Hanley that kind of gets into Hanley's kind of manic, unsustainable ways, which made her inspiration, but also perhaps imperiled the long-term sustainability of the organization at that time. Letty's first impression of Hanley when she was talked into working with volunteers and giving tours of the garbage dump just 2 months after taking the job was that the gringa was crazy, totally loca. These guajeros were beyond help, she had initially thought. In Guatemala, no nos cambiamos. We don't change. In Guatemala, la gente no ayuda. Here, we don't have a culture of helping each other. Pobre es pobre. Poverty is poverty. And she told Hanley as much. "No," said Hanley with a smile. "If we can change just one life, then we'll make a difference. If we can change the lives of 50 kids, we'll change the world forever. We'll help them study. We'll give them food, shoes, and medicine." Hanley's plan was audacious. It was madness. But as the mission began to consume Letty's life, she realized that she too was becoming loca. Together they would commute early in the morning from Antigua, which is the colonial town about an hour from Guatemala City where most expats and people live. It's away from the dangers of Guatemala City. They would commute early in the morning from Antigua on public buses, spend all day in La Iglesia with the children, or visiting families in the shanty villages around the dump, or in the basurero itself. Around dinner time, the guajeros would all approach Hanley and ask for help, or advice, or just wanted 5 minutes of her presence. Not until 7 p.m. or later would she board the chicken bus from El Trebol and return to Antigua in the dark. "Hanley, es peligroso. This is dangerous. They're going to rob us on the bus," warned Letty. "No, it's okay. The driver and the passengers on the bus know me." Exhausted, Hanley would hunch over her backpack and notebook full of information about the families, and she would fall into a deep sleep as the camioneta left Guatemala City and headed into the hills on the hour-long ride home to Antigua. "Señor, we have arrived. We're in Antigua." A fellow passenger would wake her as the bus pulled into the terminal behind Antigua's marketplace, a few blocks west of the Parque Central. Half awake, Hanley would walk home, sit on her bed, and write notes and draft letters to potential funders until the wee hours of the morning. A few hours later, she would rise, throw on the same clothes, and board the chicken bus again for Guatemala City. I'll take us now to New England. Hanley inspired so many, but the organization grows so fast, she had difficulty saying no to any of the hundreds of children from the garbage dump who would come, or their parents would come to her and say, "We also want ours to join your school." And so the growth happened so much so fast that it was unsustainable. Oftentimes it wasn't clear if they had money from month to month to keep the proverbial lights on. Hanley was pressured and ultimately talked into forming a board of directors. Supporters of hers, with nonprofit know-how and also with deep pocketbooks, formed a board of directors and helped her manage her organization as well as they could. But there was always pushback from her. She wanted to run things her way. And I'm going to read a little bit about that dynamic here in this chapter set in Maine and Michigan. Susanna Place observed that Paul Sutherland had become not only Hanley's mentor, but her partner in running the board of directors. The board wanted to establish processes for how Safe Passage would move forward. And by the way, I intersperse Safe Passage and Camino Seguro, English-Spanish names for the organization here in this book. It wanted the facts, the financial outlook, and a detailed plan for the coming year. Hanley sometimes pushed back, remembered Susanna. Does it really matter what the plan is? Hanley would ask rhetorically. This is what we need to do. I've thought it through, and I'll provide the details later. Sharon Workman remembered that the board never learned the identities of some of Hanley's most lucrative angel investors. The board learned that Hanley, this young rebel, could be guarded. Sharing the responsibility of running Safe Passage didn't come easily to Hanley. Ed Mahoney, her accountant, perceived that she viewed the board as a necessary evil. She was respectful to them, but didn't always agree with them. Hanley had launched her project almost at an impulsive whim, and she had improvised each step of the way. Now she struggled to spell out an intentional, organized plan with a long-term vision. Nevertheless, these board members were fully committed to her and the garbage dump community. They weren't going to let her down. At some board meetings it was expressed directly, sometimes it was expressed indirectly. Get out your checkbooks, we need to move ahead, said Susanna Place. But during one particularly tense moment at a board meeting in Maine, Hanley's relationship of convenience with the board nearly collapsed. There was a new board member who wasn't all that familiar with the project's history, but who wanted to quantify all of Safe Passage's operations. According to Paul, he took a PhD white paper approach to managing the nonprofit. The new board member may not have known what Paul and a few others knew. The organization wasn't going to fail financially because there was an anonymous donor who would step in and write checks that would keep Safe Passage afloat. The new board member heard Hanley say that she wanted to add more children to the student body the following January school year, which at that time totaled 500 students, with an annual cost of between $3,000 and $3,500 per child. The numbers were tight. Overall, the financial situation looked untenable. Well, you shouldn't take so many children. Maybe you should send a few of the children back, he said. We need to keep enrollment flat to balance the budget. Paul sat across the table from Hanley and watched her reaction. Oh my God, she heard that, he said to himself as her fair skin turned beet red. Why don't we take a bathroom break? Paul interrupted the conversation. He convinced her to leave the conference room and join him privately in the hallway. Hanley's head was already spinning out of control. Who are we going to send back? Who's going back to the dump, Paul? Hanley shouted. She began to name names of the children in the project. Angel, Nancy, Danielle. Who? Rachel Main, Hanley's right-hand employee in the main office, had just arrived to take photos of each board member. She came upon Hanley and Paul in the lobby. He listened with calm, but she was irate and advocating the way a mother would care for any of her own children. What do you want me to do? How can I choose one child and not another? She yelled at Paul. I can't do that. I won't do that. Hanley, I promise that as long as I'm involved, we're not going to send anybody back, said Paul. He realized at that moment that the strength of what Hanley had built couldn't be quantified in one number. No, these were individuals. Every one of these 500 kids was an individual. Each one as precious to her as though she had only one child to care for in the whole world. That was her strength, her magic. Paul understood at last. It had been said that she knew the names of every child in the garbage dump community. She knew their parents too. And now he believed it. Only that kind of protectiveness would drive this defiance. Paul thought of his late father, Dale Sutherland, the headmaster and principal at Glen Lake School near the Sleeping Bear Dunes National Lakeshore, west of Traverse City, Michigan, who also knew the names of every student at his school. Paul had once asked his dad, how do you know the names of all the kids? It's not that hard, Dale replied, if you meet them one at a time. Paul remembered his father standing outside on cold northern Michigan winter days and greeting every child as they stepped off the school bus. He met each one of them as an individual over a long period of time. Hanley did the same. We're not going to kick anyone out of the program, Paul announced when he and Hanley returned to the meeting room. He knew that statement was the only way they could keep this visionary and her care for the people and her care for her people in line with the realities of the nonprofit world. All right, I think I'll read one more. Maybe we can start our conversation a little bit early. Give me a moment here. So our protagonist, Hanley Denning, dies in a car accident. But it's not the end of Safe Passage, not the end of her program, it's not the end of this story. I chose to kind of devote maybe a few chapters, the last quarter of the book perhaps, on how the program evolves after her death, how she's mourned, but how she inspires, how the program changes, and then how those who work with her, who ran with her, both volunteers, staff, Guatemala and North America, but also other children, how she changed their lives and what they're doing today. COVID gave me kind of an interesting bookend in a way. I struggled with how to end the story because, the death of the protagonist was 15 years ago, which is a long time ago. It's eons ago. But I spent some time with Safe Passage's current executive director, Trey Holland, when the lockdown hit in March of 2020, it was, of course, intense everywhere. It was intense here. It was very intense in Guatemala. The president of Guatemala at the time was a former doctor, and so immediately everything was closed, masks, distancing, you name it. And of course, it took a lot longer for vaccines to arrive there than they did in the United States. But Safe Passage did some pretty innovative things. They developed a video-based curriculum that they could send to students on their via WhatsApp on their cell phones quite quickly, so that the education could keep on coming, even though they, of course, couldn't come to school, which was closed for almost 2 years. But Safe Passage also served the community in many ways. When Guatemala city government basically broke down and services were no longer rendered, especially for Zone 3 in the poorest places in Guatemala City, water was no longer delivered. Water obviously is the source of life. It's always important. It's especially important during a pandemic. Hands washing. Safe Passage, the program, brought in water tankers to deliver water to the community in the garbage dump when that happened. So there were some pretty innovative things and ways in which the organization pivoted in ways that Hanley, of course, never could have imagined. COVID was so unimaginable. But ways in which the organization continued to change lives. I'll read a bit here. This will be my final bit that I'll read about how some of those children have fared. Of course, not every child made it out. Some got pregnant or fathered children before they graduated and had to drop their studies. Angel Roque, the son of Mama Roque, and one of the very first to be enrolled in Camino Seguro, that first day when the doors opened at La Iglesia, was reportedly one of Hanley's star pupils, and she held high hopes that he would continue all the way to university. Angel was one of the standouts who received a scholarship to study at Quinal, the technical school. But soon after Hanley died, he impregnated his girlfriend when he was 16 and dropped out of school. If it weren't for the accident, Hanley might have intervened and convinced him to stay, one board member predicted. Some returned to the dump to help the Guajero parents in the scavenger economy. Some who left the Casa Hogar, the dormitory that she established, after it closed, took to the streets and quelled their hunger by sniffing glue. Some joined gangs, some were killed. The success stories warm hearts and show the impact of Hanley's work. Stories like Anita, who holds down a stable job working at a bank. Stories like Nancy Gutiel, the 9-year-old orphan who sold chiclets on the street, the tough girl who ran away from the Casa Hogar, the program's first graduate, who now works as a clerk in an electronics store. She lives with her husband, Daniel, whom she married in 2010, and their 2 daughters in a far safer neighborhood in Zone 13 of Guatemala City. Stories like Daniel Osorio, who Hanley put in a safe house after his stepfather was executed by gangs in front of their house, and who fell in love with video while studying at Camino Seguro. After graduating, he shot and produced much of the project's marketing footage. Danielle recently received a scholarship to attend a film school in Michoacan, Mexico. Stories like Iris Ramirez, who once sorted paper and nylon together with her mother in the garbage dump, who stuck with Camino Seguro thanks to the support of her padrino, her sponsor parent, Phil Kirshner from Yarmouth, Maine. Graduated from high school at age 18 and received a scholarship from Shared Beat, a Texas-based nonprofit that supports Guatemalans who want to work in healthcare. Iris is now in medical school in the capital, doing clinical rotations at the Roosevelt Hospital, and attended to a rising number of COVID patients during the height of the pandemic, though the hospital medical personnel lacked sufficient supplies and resources. I learn more every day. I love what I do, Iris wrote to me via email. I love serving people in this way. I love studying medicine, and even after I graduate as a general practitioner and surgeon, I will continue studying. In 2018, Iris told me that she dreamed of one day working in Guatemala's Western Highlands, where her grandparents lived and where campesino peasants with few resources could come and receive care. When I can do it, I want to set up a hospital that cares for people with low resources, or I'll go with a group like Doctors Without Borders to care for the neediest people. Because of Hanley, I am here, and I will be a doctor, wrote Iris. Hanley gave my life a path and a meaning. I wish I could stand before her and ask what she saw in me. I'll quit for now. Thanks for listening. I'd love to hear your thoughts or questions. Especially those who know Safe Passage or know Guatemala, or know people or ventures like what Hanley Denning did. I'm sorry, I'm remiss to say, my friend Carrie Palesci is here with Safe Passage. Carrie is the director of annual giving and joined me I did a couple readings of this book in Guatemala in November, which was a great thrill. Shared this with some of the characters in the book, including Iris Ramirez, the person we just met who's in medical school, the graduate, who was sort of nylons in the dump. I also shared this book during that trip with Hanley's mom, Marina, who has moved to Guatemala and lives there. And, you know, you could imagine how complex her feelings, having lost her daughter at age 36, 15 years ago, and then moving to this country to really get to know this country that changed her daughter, and then, you know, a book being written about her daughter and her daughter's impact on her daughter's death, how complicated that was for her mom when I presented the book to her, but that's also one of the reasons that I went down there a few months ago.
Can you tell us about the evolution of the perspective of the parents?
Of the family, the Denning
Yeah.
family? Yeah, so Mom Marina moved down to Guatemala 6-7 years ago. You know, I, in one sense, like many retired North Americans, Guatemala is relatively inexpensive, it's warm, it's beautiful, it's a great place to live in your 70s or 80s. But I think, she didn't tell me this, Marina, but I think in a way, she feels closer to her daughter, her late daughter, by being there as well. Yeah. Hanley's father, Michael, international banker, very successful, passed away this fall after a battle with, I don't know if it was Alzheimer's or dementia. Hanley has 3 brothers, Jordan, Seth, and Lucas, who are all doing well, living just different places in the East Coast. Yeah. What else can I say about the family? Yeah, they've received this well. It was interesting when I set out to write this book, you know, after having chewed on it for a while and deciding that she was a more nuanced, complex character who I think was worthy of a book. At first, the family, well, they weren't comfortable at first. They didn't know me. I'm not from Maine, I'm not from Boston, I'm from Michigan. I emailed them a few times. It took a lot of conversation, and it wasn't actually until I literally landed in Portland, Maine on a day in March 2019 and called Mom Marina from my hotel and said, I'm here, I know you're here this weekend, I'd love to meet with you, that she felt comfortable talking with me, and then I drove my rental car with a tape recorder on and she talked for 8 hours straight. But I respect that they were protective of their daughter's legacy. I think that's understandable. Yeah, but they seem to embrace this book and this story and are thrilled and proud that it's out. Yeah.
What was your overall goal in writing this book? Like, what question were you trying to answer in writing this?
Yeah. Thanks for asking that question. Yeah, a couple things. I mean, selfishly, I love Guatemala, and I wanted an excuse to write more about Guatemalan travel there. And I wanted to honor Hanley's story, and I wanted to honor Safe Passage and the work it does. But the thesis that drove me through a lot of this was really to ask this question: why, when so many of us, privileged people from the global north, when so many of us go to Guatemala or a place like Guatemala, the developing country, and learn the local language, do some good volunteer work, have adventures, travel, most of us ultimately return to our comfortable lives back here. What was different about Hanley? Why did she stay? Why did she stay? Why did she take the tough road? Her dad wanted her to come home. He was upset at first that she didn't. She chose a life of service and ultimately paid the ultimate price for it. What was different about her? I think to some degree the book, which is based on many interviews and memories, answers that question, but to some degree it doesn't. I think it's still a dangling question, and I kind of like that it's still out there, because I think that in a way it's then a challenge to all of us that, maybe, she was special, that she could do this, that she could give her life to this cause, but each of us is capable of also acts of service or a life of service, or certainly, resisting that kind of societal urge to turn away from poverty and forget that it doesn't exist. We can all do something. So yeah, that was my inspiration for writing the story and asking that question.
So one of the things I appreciated about the bits that you read, and I look forward to reading it, was that it seems like it's not just one-dimensional, like she was some kind of other being, angel or something. That there's the sense of her as a complex person.
Yeah, and there's more to it in the book. There are bits in the book, stories. I alluded to Leti Mendez, her Guatemalan deputy. Leti told Hanley when she started Safe Passage she had just lost a child. Was traumatized, and then about a year or two later, she did have her first child by a cesarean section in the hospital in Guatemala City. And like any employee anywhere who's having a child, she told Hanley, her boss, "I'm taking some time off after having my child," right? Within a couple hours of her having Juan, I think his name was, her son, Hanley's calling Leti on her cell phone, asking where certain files are in the office, and then asking her, "Come into the office." Ridiculous. Boss should never do that under any circumstances, but this is what Hanley did. She was so manic, so driven. Leti, of course, at first told Hanley, "No, I just had a child. I'm not going to work right now." But a couple days after she gave birth, Leti did come into the office to help Hanley out with some tasks. She actually brought her newborn and put him in a cardboard box in the office, just like the Guajeros would put their babies in cardboard boxes back in the day. There's a bit about Hanley's accountant, Ed Mahoney, from Boston actually, who was kind of a yin and yang relationship to Hanley. He was a numbers guy. He was conservative. He didn't want the project to grow too fast. He was more realistic. She was the dreamer. And they would have arguments, fights over structural things. But she couldn't fire him because he was too important to her. And he couldn't walk away because he was also passionate about this. And I tell a story that Ed Mahoney told me. He also still lives in Guatemala. about, what was it? Hanley and Ed went out for coffee some afternoon or some evening, and they had an argument, a discussion probably about budgets. And late that night or early the following morning, Ed gets a call from Hanley saying, I sent you an email, but I don't want you to open it because I'm worried it might damage our relationship. I want you to delete it. And he deleted the email. And I asked Ed, what do you think the email said and what would have happened if you had opened it? And he said, well, I probably would have gotten mad and quit. Anyhow, she was not just an angel, she had complex relationships with her own staff, people who she needed the most, which I thought made it more compelling. I struggled with the title of this book, Angel of the Garbage Dump. I struggled with the kind of I think the white savior connotation that it brings to the fore. I still struggle with it. We correctly, I think collectively have learned that the stories that are true and that we tell and should be telling are not of white people coming down and showing people of color, this is how you live or pull yourself out of the situation. That's way too simplistic and it's not helpful. So I struggle with that. The reason I ultimately went with this title, Angel of the Garbage Dump, which is El Ángel del Basurero in Spanish, that's what the Guajeros called her. They called her Nuestro Ángel, our angel, El Ángel del Basurero. That expression was then printed in the Prensa Libre in the Guatemalan national newspaper after she died. Because El Ángel del Basurero was a term of and by the Guatemalans, I felt like it was maybe appropriate to use the translation of it. Because I didn't, the cover of the book is not always the depth of what it offers inside. But I think it's important to show that, even these people, the Gandhis, the Mandelas, the Mother Teresas that we, the Dr. Kings that we worship as world changers, which they are, we also should see them as complex people with flaws and faults. Yeah.
So I know, our daughter was a volunteer down in St. Passage when Campbell was still alive, right before he died. And my daughter and I just went back 2 weeks ago and got to visit, and it was just amazing what her legacy is there, and to see the school, and it's now an accredited school. She started out, she was dealing with a lot of kids, but it was like an after-school sort of drop in, give them food, try and teach something on the side kind of thing. And now it's like, because you've been down recently too, all these buildings and gardens that are getting built, and playgrounds, and accredited through 9th grade, and they now have a preschool, accredited preschool program. It was really, really impressive.
Yeah, it's an oasis. It's an oasis in a desert. You talk about green lawns. One of the supporters and volunteers from Maine who I interviewed and who has a brief part in the book talked about going down and his sponsor child, the joy his sponsor child felt when he got the opportunity to just to roll on a green lawn, because the shanty village around the garbage dump, it's better now. More roads are paved, but we're talking mud and trash. We're not talking green grass. It's just something that we take for granted, green grass. Such an oasis for some of these children.
One of the things I was really struck by was the educational philosophy there, and Hanley may have initiated some of that, but clearly the people who've been hired there and have continued to work, they've trained people in Waldorf, and the focus is really on social emotional development of these kids, and it's very different than traditional schools in Guatemala.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, the focus now is on EL education, so it's an expeditionary learning curriculum, and research, in this model of education shows that this is the model that best serves students who have dealt with traumatic events in their lives. So it's very much about, our school, while it's about the expeditionary learning, it's also about, meeting the students' basic needs with the understanding, like it's Maslow's hierarchy, that, students cannot learn, they can't get an education without food in their stomachs and without, nutrition programming and social services. So while we are, a pre-K through 9th grade program, we are also all the wraparound services that support that program to make sure that the kids are gonna be able to stay in school as much as possible.
And serving parents too, like the mothers who have
So
now
we have
formed a business.
Yes, we have a partner organization now called Crayamos. They're actually their own separate NGO. For many, many years, we ran adult education programming out of Safe Passage as well for the moms and the dads who wanted to complete their education. That has since been taken over by Crayamos. And then they are also a business entrepreneurial program that focuses on, helping the moms learn things that will be able to bring them into a different type of business model. So rather than working in the dump, our moms are learning to make jewelry, to sew. They now have a partnership with Starbucks, so moms are training to become baristas and have jobs guaranteed after that. So that's another great organization right within Zone 7. And they rent space from Safe Passage, so they're right on our campus, so that the moms can drop off their kids and then go to work with Crayamos.
Yeah, one thing that you talk about, I mean, then this story, when Hanley first launched this, and now food is currency. Food is currency everywhere, especially in places like garbage dump in Zone 3 in Guatemala City. Without food, without full stomachs, you can't expect one to learn. You can't expect the community to trust you. Those early days of doubt when the Guajiro community, the workers, didn't really trust Hanley. They thought that she was going to steal their children, but they also didn't see the purpose of education. The deal that she worked out, and she had learned this from a different nonprofit in Guatemala prior to Safe Passage, the deal she worked out was if you send your students to school and then to what initially was an educational drop-in center, a reinforcement center at that old church, if you get them in school and keep them out of the garbage dump, you will be rewarded with bags of rice and beans and vegetable oil each month. Food is currency. And we briefly met Mama Roque, one of the first moms, a real strong-willed, tough Guajiro mother in this book. There's a scene I didn't read from, but her children didn't go to school. She didn't diligently send them to school at first, and she came to that first parents' monthly meeting that Hanley and Joanne, the Danish woman, were facilitating. And Mama Roque expected bags of rice and beans, and she wasn't going to get them, and Hanley wasn't backing down because she hadn't honored her part of the bargain. She hadn't sent her kids to school. And a fight almost ensued, and Mama Roque and the others were threatening Hanley to send gangs on them. But Hanley didn't back down. She stuck with it. If your kids go to school, you will get rice and beans, bags of nutritional foods at the end of the month. That's how the program grew. That's how the trust grew.
At this time, and maybe you can answer this, but are most of the educators and those who are directing the instruction at the school Guatemalan?
Yes. Yep, I would say I don't know the statistics specifically, but probably more than 95% are Guatemalans who are teaching. We have, prior to the pandemic, we accepted volunteers pretty regularly and tried to fit them in mentoring capacities in ways that were not disruptive to the classroom. Now we have a more formalized volunteer program that's going to focus specifically on English literacy and bringing expats and Americans or Europeans who have ESL training, bringing them into the classroom to support our English teachers in the English program that we currently have. But most of our full-time teachers, if not all, are Guatemalan.
So did they come up here to get trained in expeditionary learning, or did EL trainers?
We
Guatemala?
partnered with a couple of schools in North Carolina and in Portland, and a Rotary Club actually helped support bringing teachers down to campus to do training with our staff.
one of the things that I found interesting to explore in my time in Guatemala recently was the question of how Hanley and her legacy is remembered at the school. I mean, she's the founder and the inspiration for this school, this project. Her face, her picture, her name is everywhere on the campus. Buildings named after her, pictures of her, portraits of her. But, 15 years she's been gone. Almost, well, actually, my math is off, 07, 16. None of this, obviously, none of the students at the school remember who she was, knew her. They're too young. I think Mark Boothrick might be the only staff member who knew her.
So Mark and one of our social workers,
Right.
Juan, worked alongside Hanley. He's the staff member, just aside from Mark, who's been there the longest with us. I think he's worked for Safe Passage 16 or 17 years.
Yeah.
So he remembers her well.
But that's it?
But that's it.
Just a couple?
Yeah.
So I thought that was an interesting question. I mean, how does this organization, how does it remember its founder? When the organization has changed a lot, it is its own school now rather than an educational reinforcement center. It has a campus now. It's no longer this organization run piecemeal out of a rat-infested church. Yeah, but I think her impact I found fascinating. Her impact on people who never met her. And also her impact on those who did meet her and are doing other amazing things in the world now. Yeah. I know it's almost 8. One more question, if anyone has any, or comment, or a thought to share? No? So if you have any more questions about Safe Passage, Carrie, there's a table back there with brochures and pamphlets. I would be happy to sign books if you have purchased them or would like to. Where should I set up, Tyler?
Yeah, you can hang out right
here?
there. Folks can line
Okay.
up, sort of by the bookshelves. And we've got books for sale in the back.
Thank you so much for coming and listening and taking part. If the story resonates with you, share it with your loved ones, your friends, your fellow Rotarians, church members, those with whom you associate. Thanks so much.